Moral imagination and the way that it progressed into the most toxic forms of ideology will continue to in within the rubber room if no discussion revolving these beliefs stay intact, if no stimulus or interest of the general population exists. And that's why we want to forward our message even to those people within those rubber rooms that we have mentioned, because there are a lot of rubber rooms, and if you formulate a general stimulus of discussion within them, that's how you create a general consensus with them. Because we want people to confront, reinterpret, and renegotiate the meanings they already hold rather than letting those meanings calcify in isolation. Because in the world of opposition, this harmful practices will still exist, which gain no response from them on how they will fix this from the status quo. First issue then, on the landscape of conversation within this superstition, and this is where I want you to view the debate on the basis of harm reduction. Opposition's response to this initially by saying that these actions are not that urgent because the people who crucify a certain group of animals are already conservative in nature and it's harder to persuade them. First question, so they launched this question of why we should do it. And our response was, why not? Then there's threefold of responses to this. First response, first, it is untrue that it's not urgent. This is where I want you to view the outcomes that oppositions want. Because our first level of response to this is that the action of the public education and the extent that it's pushed towards our society has already been integrated within the status quo. Like, for example, look at your books, look at all of the social movement that we have right now and all of the clamor within the status quo. People are already rational. That's why a lot of people already know that harming animals are bad. But why do they still continue to do this in some other areas? So the uncomparative case of opposition is really off-clash because the question of this debate is whether we should do this or not. And this is not a THW motion. And the area of discussion within OP is simply focusing on the efficiency of the policy in itself. Again, this is THBT. You need to prove why it's contrastive rather than focusing on all of the possible budgeting and all of the focus, all of the efficiency on this instead. Because if we prove to you the principal case here, we'll still position to win. Which centers the climatic area issue here in Gulf, which remained unresponded to by opposition. Now, we claim that people already know that eating dogs are bad. But my POI is, why do some people in far-flung regions still eat dogs in the Philippines, for instance? Because we already told you that it remains unpenetrated within these areas. Like, they already know that it's bad objectively within all of the basis of social movement, but you need to also penetrate them on the basis of belief. Because if you penetrate them within those bases of belief, they cannot use the lieu of practices and norms as a protection to all of these claims. In the world of opposition, animals within these areas remain harmed. They remain haunted despite of all of the liberation that we have within our access of information because people doesn't really care. And far worse, the response to this is the battle cry of it doesn't really matter. This has been integrated within our norms and no law can stop this because no one would report them within these areas and no stimulus from other communities happens because, they don't have any incentive to report in itself because we don't formulate a general consensus on this. That's why in their world, animals within these regions are just left for worse. That's why we say that this is urgent. So the urgency of fixing these glaring problems exists. This is why my constructive speakers are crucial. Here's the way up here. We have explained that the only way to rationalize within a community that bans on sacred belief is through those cross-divergence of those sacred beliefs in itself, which we explained that it will only happen within a strategy of plurality. But since DLO asks how, my response to this is by bringing up the Gobs case so far and what we actually proved within this case. What we want is to gain the access to pre-existing authority structures that already command trust within these areas. First, we don't attack the belief system because that's just going to be unlikely to penetrate within these areas. Like if you just attack them using those belief systems and all of those objectives of science that we have, I'm not quite sure it's going to be efficient. They're still going to eat dogs if they want to because they say they're just going to claim that it's on the basis of protecting their norms. So what we want to do instead is we want to use other belief system to formulate a general consensus of what's good. What's a primary evolution of discussion that's required? Instead of just discarding the myth that we reinterpret that harm means in contemporary context, what harm means in contemporary context, and this is the only way to gain reinterpretation and universal coalition within the aspect of sacred beliefs within this issue. If the tradition says misfortune follows killing a sacred animal, we can just simply say that all of the industrialized cruelty within other communities believe also that harming this specific animal is also good. Like the fact that Egyptians view cats as god within one of their folklores, in the same time that other people believe that a black cat is bad. So we use those cross divergence and plurality in order for us to gain all of those systemic access to those discussions. Because if you don't have, if you don't believe all of those impacts that we have launched, at least you still have the access to those stimulus of discussion in the way that the myth evolves to address new harms without losing access to its symbolic authority. Because we just want to claim here that most of the time people will compete against those narratives. And those competition allows them to be more liberated, to accept new forms of belief that doesn't harm other people. This is why the impact of liberating those norms and belief within those special spaces happens, because you force them to be more liberated and to compete with one another, and that's going to be unlocked the moment that you open the general consensus or the general discussion as a social movement in itself. That's how we have done it with feminist movement. We don't just attack the patriarchy, we also penetrate the rubber rooms of the echo chambers within it. This leads to my second point of response. How do we view the lens of accountability then within the issue in this debate? Second, this directly reshapes how accountability functions within these communities, because when animal protection is framed through shared folklore rather than external accusation, therefore you have more reporting means. That means reporting cruelty becomes a defense of collective values rather than an attack to someone's identity, I guess, or to someone's culture. And we can only gain that when people are being much more stimulated within the discussion of secrecy. Like, for example, you will know that it's bad within other religious sector. That's why you wouldn't do it. And as much as possible, you also have the incentive to report those abuses, because most of the time in this situation, your leaders are already having those discussions anyways, because as a social movement you formulated those spaces for them to talk within each other. You use those conservative spaces in order for them to liberate themselves through the means of competition. Propose.